What's up, you filthy flapjacks? My name is Wes, and you're listening to the Ear Coffee Podcast. For today's episode, I talked with RB Rowe of Get Tuff. They just released their debut record, In Sickness and in Hell, after spending the last 2 years working on it. We talked about the roller coaster that the album took to get where it is, the joys of collaboration, the front bottoms, and a whole lot more. It was great to have RB back on the show, so you're in for an absolute treat. Without further ado, here's my interview with RB of Get Tuff, here on the Ear Coffee Podcast. So, your record, In Sickness and Hell, just came out just a couple days ago as of recording, like last Friday, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we're catching you right after like that whirlwind first weekend of freaking out and
yes.
the record being out. And as I was just kind of mentioning off the record, or before we started the interview, you are a veteran of the show because you are also in the band The Weekdays, who put out that the EP Fabric of Our Lives last year and sat through a 3-hour Zoom call.
That was so long, and it was so much long. Fun though.
I know, I had a lot of fun too. So that's definitely justified, at least in our eyes, the 3-hour length. I don't know about the listeners, but yeah. So let's just jump right into it because people kind of hopefully have checked out that episode, already kind of have an idea of your foundations as a musician. Kind of skipping over that first question I usually hit people with. So this is your solo debut. To use professional music critic language, trademark. And you've been working on it for the last 2 years right? Okay. When you first started working on these songs and started kind of finding what you wanted to work on, what you wanted to say with these songs, did you know that it was going to end up as an album? Was that always kind of an end goal you had? Or was it something that developed once you realized, I have like 10, 12 songs, I have a certain number of songs, I wonder if this could be an album? And then that next step kind of happened. Was it always something you'd been conscious of from the start?
Well, it's kind of interesting because when I say that I've been working on the record for 2 years, that's when I decided I was making a record.
Oh, okay.
This project, I've been making pop music for about 3 years actually. And the track 8 on the record, Take It Back, is the first song that I wrote with intentions of making pop music. So when I wrote that song, I super had like no intentions. I mostly had like the intentions of just making kind of like lo-fi stuff and putting it on Bandcamp, on SoundCloud or whatever. And then I don't know, I just kept making songs and I was just like, wow, I should make a record. I had that thought when I had written probably like 10 or 15 songs. I was like, yeah, let's like try to make a record. And then I was like, let's get to 20 songs and then we'll choose 10 to make a record from. And instead I ended up like writing 10 more songs. Cause I had, like 15 or something and I took like 10 of those and I was like, okay, yeah, some of these are good. It probably ended up only being like 5 of them on the first track listing of the album. But then I just kept writing so much more. And yeah, most of the songs that ended up on the record were written within the last like year.
Okay.
Like I think I wrote Ragdoll, which was like the first, well, no.
I think that was like the first official single.
That was the first single. And that was definitely the one that like gave me my vision for like what I wanted the record to sound like.
Okay.
But I would say other than the first track and Take It Back and the very last track, everything else was written between August 2019 and now,
Okay.
So yeah, it was crazy how little I kept from the initial like formation of the album.
Yeah, especially given like a whole, like it was a 3-year process, but like it's still like a full 2 years of that was just like I'm making a record, and like you're in that mindset So like that's almost, I don't want to be like it's a year wasted, but it's just like a year you kind of spent just like figuring things out and just kind of playing
Yeah, well,
around.
I was still learning how to do electronic music at all. Um, and I had a lot of fun in that process, but basically what I realized is the songs that I had initially been writing were all very like bubblegum pop, very similar to like Piss Poor Excuse,
Yeah.
which is like obviously the poppiest song on the record, which I love, but it's
Yeah.
just like it's not like that's what comes naturally to me, but it's not like what I really want to be known for.
Hmm.
Um, or like as if I am known for something like that, I want it to have this dark edge. So I kind of had to like I learned how to make pop music, right? And then I'm like doing all these like bubblegum songs. And then I was just like, wait a second, let's try to make it darker. And then I had to
Hmm.
basically relearn all of the stuff that I had already learned as far as like tone and like
Yeah.
atmosphere, in order to like kind of evoke the vibe that I wanted.
Yeah, have like that same kind of energy throughout, with the exception
Yeah.
of like Piss Poor kind of being like a jolt of sunlight through the clouds during like
Oh,
the
yeah.
first half of the record.
But
Um,
even that song is about just being like so
like
depressed.
crippled by depression.
Yeah.
It's the happy sad. If people just focus on like the chorus is nice, they don't know what you're saying, but then they listen to the lyrics and then like, wait, I'm sad,
Yeah.
but I'm also dancing. Um, which is not a
Oh, yeah.
bad lane to be in. I think sad, but
Oh,
also
I
dancing.
love yeah,
Like,
that's definitely my lane. I'm like, I want you can kind of it's like a choose your own adventure sort of thing where it's like you can either choose to like listen to the lyrics and like relate to that, or you can just like not listen to a word I'm saying and just shake your fucking ass. I don't really care either way.
it's an album for every day of the week, no matter where you're at. If you're ready to
Yeah.
throw down, then it's got Insictus in Hell is there for you.
Yeah.
um, this I'm actually curious. So, were you ever planning on like releasing your own kind of solo music before you really latched on to making like electronic pop and just kind of the sound that you've arrived on and you've been working on for the past 3 years? Were you working on like other projects like that? And then, if that is the case, or regardless, I'm curious what made you kind of shift your focus to pop, whether there was any like particular song or like something that you listened to or that you really thought hard about that was like, I want to, I think this is a really cool lane for me to work in and I want to explore this. Because I'm just curious where you kind of,
Yeah.
how you ended up where you were at.
So previously I like I gotta figure out how I wanna say this. Uh, Before I started making pop music, I was doing solo stuff. I was working on this project called Modal that I never did anything with it. That was, like, very inspired by, like, adventures and, like, kinda like soft rock like that, like Jay Som, kinda like spacey, a little bit
Yeah.
shoegazy.
And you mean the
Um
band adventures, not like the concept
Yeah.
of adventuring.
Yeah,
Okay,
the
cool.
band adventures.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I was making something like that, and I had, oh god, probably, like, an album's worth of songs written, um, but I got to this point basically, like, what took me away from, like, doing that project was I I had a moment with myself where I was like, "I don't wanna play guitar." I was like, "I do not wanna play guitar." And then I was like, "Well, I could just, like, front this." And then I was, trying to think about that, and it kinda just tapered off. Basically, the way I started making electronic music was, 1, I've just always loved pop music, like,
Hmm.
Lorde and Taylor Swift are, like, huge, huge inspirations for me, and Churches, Purity Ring,
Churches, yes.
Poppy, yeah, like, I love pop music. It's, like, 90% of what I listen to. Um so I've always loved, like, synths and stuff, but what really solidified it for me was one time I was on tour and I ran out of data, and so I started making beats in GarageBand on my phone, um, and I was like, "This is kinda fun." And the reason that this project grew to be what it was that I wanted to be able to be working on music while I was on the road,
Hmm.
um and doing it electronically was kind of the only way for me to do that. And I like first it started with the intention of like I'm gonna do this, and then like I'll retrack these like leads and these tones on like real instruments.
Yeah, like once you're off tour or like back in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would be just like, oh yeah, this lead will be on a guitar, and maybe I'll still keep the synths in there, and like this sub bass synth is going to be an actual bass, and it just never happened that way. I just kind of fell in love with the way that the tones I made like sounded, and the way that they like complemented my voice and my songwriting. Um, and yeah, it's just kind of funny that it like started just like kind of out of nowhere. It was something I never thought I would
Mm-hmm.
do. Um, but I've always joked about wanting to be a pop star, so now I get
Yeah.
to do it. That's
Yeah.
fun.
GarageBand, the app version, was just the gateway drug that
Yeah,
took you
straight up.
3 years down the line to releasing a record.
Yeah.
Um, so you kind of already touched on this a little bit, but um, did progress on the record and the songs, whether they were songs that you thought might end up on the record and eventually didn't, or that batch of like 8 or so songs or however many that you wrote in the last like 12 months or so, was progress pretty gradual and you're just kind of continually writing and working on stuff, or did it end up being a lot like you're just going through bursts of creativity where you just write a bunch of songs or have a ton of ideas flowing out of you, and then you'd kind of scratch at those for a little bit, and then so on. So I guess I'm just kind of asking about what your creative process was for like
Yeah.
as you were working on it over the course of these last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. Basically, the way that I write songs, and this might make me sound like a fucking crazy person, but I usually write the whole thing and demo the whole thing out in one day. Um, so, and that's not like the burst of creativity thing. Usually it's like I'll hear one word that I think is cool, or
Mm-hmm.
like I listen to music when I'm in the shower, and a lot of times I'll get ideas when I'm in the shower.
Yeah.
Um, like I'll hear one thing in a song that's like, oh, I really like the way this synth sounds, or I really like the way the drums are in like this chorus, like, and then taking that idea and just being like, I want to write a song that has something like this in it.
Okay.
Um, but for like, I don't know, it's hard to say it because I'm always kind of writing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the things that don't click immediately usually just don't click at all. Um, so like we'll say for the songs that I wrote in, the last like 12 months, um, which were, like Ragdoll, Misery, Over It, Piss Poor Excuse, uh, and Ex Post Facto. I think that's all of them that ended up on it.
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's right. All of those like were songs that I just kind of wrote in one day. I actually wrote Ragdoll and Misery like 2 days apart.
Oh wow.
Like wrote, demoed, had it like pretty much in how it was going to be, except for, finalizing, like doing the vocals, like doing
Mm-hmm.
final vocals and changing some lyrics here and there. But like the core of those songs was just like immediately done. And similarly with Over It, I think I wrote that like a month later. And I just like demoed this whole thing out, and I couldn't come up with a second verse. And I was just like, me and Jesse have been talking about doing a song together. So I just like text Jesse. I'm like, you want to be on this song? And they were like, yes. And that's like how it was born. I don't know. It's a weird process for me because
Mm-hmm.
I often struggle with like the creative wall. Um, but my walls are usually like, it's like I'll get something sort of there, but I'll never come back to it because the
Mm-hmm.
spark didn't fly.
Yeah.
Um, every now and again, you come back to something and it like you can add more to it. But most of the songs that I end up really liking are the ones that come from that just like stream of consciousness. I
Mm-hmm.
just spent like 5 or 6 hours doing this.
And you
Um,
feel really good about it and like connect with it
yeah,
right like a snap right off the bat.
yeah. And I am grateful for that sort of process, but it does make it hard to like, I don't know, to go back to the things that didn't click immediately.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me feel like, oh, well, if it didn't click, then it's probably bad, which is just not true.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I
That's a
guess
really
that,
interesting point. Yeah.
yeah. Um, yeah, process is weird.
it's so all over the place for even just a single person. So
Yeah.
it's always cool to hear kind of how that varies and how it evolves kind of throughout the process. And I, I've actually interviewed someone who does a very different version of kind of like that electronic pop of just like very like kind of solo. They produce and do everything themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and how they would revisit stuff, and then almost all the stuff they've been putting out recently has been stuff that they revisited from like
Oh.
that kind of like almost like not the opposite, because we can't like rule out the possibility, but
Yeah.
you'll like go through your hard drive and like,
I
oh,
say like
this is
maybe
a
that'll be the
banger.
next release. I don't know.
I mean, you have enough songs for like what, like 5 albums at this point, so like
I have so many. My back catalog is growing faster than I can put songs out. Like it's really
within reason, like you can do like the like just like the Ariana Grande thing where you're like, I just want to release music like this and just drop a second record like 6 months later.
Oh yeah. I super wasn't like planning to do that at all, actually.
Oh no, what have we revealed?
I might do some B-sides. That's like genuinely like
Oh,
I'm thinking about doing the B-sides that didn't end
or
up on the record.
yeah, like kind of like what like rappers do when they're like, it's a deluxe version, but it's just a
Yeah.
whole nother album of like
Yeah.
kind of B-sides.
Well, I really like Carly Rae Jepsen, and she always
Oh,
does that.
you're right.
And I always love her B-sides.
They're
So
so
I'm
good.
interested to know if like people would feel the same way about the stuff that I do. Because most of the B-sides are just like they're like love songs and horny songs that I was just like, these don't belong on this record about my trauma.
I yeah, it, I support that. I think that'll be really as ambiguously as I can say this without like us giving away too much. Well, before you've even announced anything or
Yeah.
committed, really. Um, so you had the 4 singles that came out throughout 2020.
Mhm.
Were you kind of conscious of like the timeline of it all when you first released Ragdoll and kind of put out the next 3 songs after that? Because you didn't announce the record until I think just before Over It came out, about like
Yeah.
a month and a half ago.
Mhm.
So at least from my uninformed perspective prior to the album coming out, I was like, oh, they're just dropping a bunch of songs and just kind of song by song, and had real
Yeah.
no conception of like maybe like there's an EP that these songs are going to end on. So were you, how deliberate was your process of putting out these 4 songs, or was it just kind of like, I feel good about this song, this I should put something out, and then Ragdoll comes out or Misery comes out or so what have you? So I'm just curious about how meticulous and deliberate you were, if it was more kind of off the cuff.
Yeah. So initially this record was supposed to come out last June.
Oh.
Um, because I had pretty much all of the songs done. The track list was slightly different because I still hadn't written Piss Poor Excuse or Ex Post Facto.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't rearranged the last track, There's Nothing Here Yet. But initially, before the world ended, I was going to record all of my vocals before I left for tour in March. And then I was going to mix on the road, and then the record was going to be out by June, by my birthday, so like mid-June. But then the world ended, and I was like, let's maybe try to take this as like an opportunity to spend more time on the record. And so I spent more time. But the issue with spending more time is then you start to fixate on things and things that you want to be different. But I just knew once I like had Ragdoll like finished, I was just like, this, like, I need to just like put this out. Because initially that wasn't even going to be the first single. I don't even know what I wanted to be first. I kind of thought Over It would be cool, but I was still waiting on the feature.
Yeah.
And then we were doing some live stream sets, and Emma, who plays piano for me, she was like, Ragdoll should be the single. And I was like, the single? And she's like, yeah, like that should be the first one you put out. I was like, that's a little scary. It's like a 5-minute song about abuse, like, and like straight out the gate, like that's what I should do. And she's like, yeah, it's heavy. People are going to love it. And I was just like, okay.
Okay.
So I like finished it, and I was like, okay. And it was like really scary to be like, this is the first thing that I'm putting out. Like,
Yeah.
But people responded to it really well. And then my intentions were to then put out a single every month, and then for the record to come out sometime in like September or November. I didn't want to conflict with the weekdays release. That was that was like the main issue. Was
Dunk
that
on your
like
own band by dropping the same day.
it very easily could have come out like the same week, you know, like it was like pretty much done at that point. But I knew that I couldn't conflict. So I was like, I have to take more time now because it wasn't done by September. So I was like, okay, so I can't put it out in October. And then November came and I was like, but I don't want to put something out this close to the election. What if there's civil unrest? Like, I don't want to like.
What if there is?
Yeah, right. And yeah, so I was just like, you know what? Like, I finally accepted. I was like, I don't want to put it out in December because that'll be too late for it to like matter and for it to be on anyone's radar. And so I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna be like the first release of the new year. Like I was like, that's it, like I'm just gonna do that, because if I put it out any later, I was just like, I am not gonna be able to wait that long. I'm gonna end up leaking my own fucking record if I try to say that it comes out in like March or something.
Yeah, someone just finds like the Dropbox folder, like, hey, what is this?
Yeah. Well, there are like so many times where I was just like, fuck it, I'm just gonna unprivate my SoundCloud link to it, just like see what happens. Yeah. So it's been like a full year of me trying to put this record out, and now it's finally out, and I'm just like, I'm over the moon about it. Because mostly I wanted it to be out so quickly because I'm just like, I just want to put more things out, but I need there to be something substantial on my Spotify right now so that like I can take time on the other stuff and not feel like nobody knows like what I'm doing, you know?
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, you don't want to finish LP2 before you even released LP1.
Well, that was the joke I kept making, is that like I have like the next release like written and demoed. I'm just like, ew. Like, well, obviously the first iteration of it, who knows if it'll change. But literally I just like, I have it pretty much done. And like the record wasn't even out, and I'm just like, oh my god, like should I just put out a fucking double LP? What are we doing here?
You can't quite George Harrison your way out of the three. Just like, my debut were at least 3 CDs long.
Yeah,
like 6
That'd be
vinyl.
Cool, though.
Yeah. Especially with like the probable like weekdays triple album coming out eventually.
Yeah,
you're just on the multi-disc train.
Yeah.
You kind of already answered this, but how did the album really change as you worked on it, especially like this past year as you were tweaking things, adding songs, kind of waiting for the right time? Well, not waiting, but like trying to find the right time to actually release it. How did your feelings about these songs change as you kind of had so much time to just sit with a lot of them and either tweak them if you wanted, or just really feel hopefully extra confident in them? You're like, I've listened to this a million times over the past 6 months and I still feel good about it. That's a good thing. So yeah, just how did your feelings like change over like at least leading up to when you really kind of had everything locked in and you were just waiting for the like when to release it, but all the songs were like mastered and finished?
Yeah. It's weird because I've already kind of said that like a lot of the songs that ended up on here, like I didn't expect to, especially the older ones. Like the fact that like In a Pinch and Take It Back and There's Nothing Here Yet are even on the record is like crazy to me. Because In a Pinch, I wrote, what year is it? It's 2021. I wrote that song in 2017.
Oh my goodness.
It was, and it's crazy because it's the first song that I wrote after the events of Ragdoll, and the version that's on the record is literally the phone demo that I made of that song when I was like going through that. And I had this intention of like re-recording it. It was just one of those songs that's been sitting in my Google Drive for years, where I was just like, maybe one day I'll do something with this. I'll make it like a full song. And then as I was like kind of going through the millions of times that I like put together a track list. I had like track list A, B, C, D in my drive where I would just like listen through them. Like, does this make sense? It just like, and it was previously starting just with Ragdoll. Like that was the intention, was that was just going to be the first song. And the more I listened through everything I had, I was just like, I feel like this is structurally important to the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of like, it's like the inciting moment, you know, and
Yeah.
the fact that it is like the true, like visceral, this is happening, like demo of that. Like, I think once I was able to write Ragdoll and finally like unpack that traumatic experience,
Mm-hmm.
that like in a pinch meant so much more to me. Because it's one of those things that I was just like, oh, this is like a weird metaphor and like it doesn't really make any sense, but it's like a fun thing. There's like fun harmony. And then when I like really kind of A to B those two songs, I was just like, oh, like I like recognize like what I was actually feeling in those moments. And that's been a lot of that's how I feel about the growth of a lot of these songs too, is like as I was finalizing them and you know, tweaking the lyrics in any way I needed to and like redoing the vocals, like I was kind of like really acknowledging what I had written, because I
Mm-hmm.
think part of the not issue, but like part of the thing that comes with writing in such a stream of consciousness way is that um like, you know, it all just kind of falls out
And you have to
and
like
then you
figure
just
out what it means, kind of.
yeah, you just like let it fall and then just like see what happens. And then, you know, I wouldn't ever really think about what I had written lyrically again because I'd be so focused on like all the other parts of like the demo or whatever. Um, and so it's like, it's very affirming to kind of look back on the things that I had written in times of my life that were so hard and be able to see them through this new lens of
Mm-hmm.
like now being able to put out a record, like a solo LP, and like how cool that is to me.
Yeah.
Like, um, yeah, it's like, yeah, it's pretty crazy too. And I've been wanting to talk about this a lot just in general, but the last track, There's Nothing Here Yet, that song initially, I wrote it like, you know, stream of consciousness one night. Um, and it's like a bubblegum pop song. The original demo of that song is like, it's bouncy, it's got synths, it's got fake strings.
What?
It's
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
it is actually very funny because I wrote that song and demoed that the night before I demoed out the Your Shoulder from the Weekdays EP,
Whoa.
which also has those strings. It's the same
Yeah.
string tone. I was like
Oh.
learning how to use that string tone. And so I like use it on my song. And then I was like, oh, this would be cool for that Weekdays song that I'm working on. And so I wrote those in like the same 2 days.
Yo.
Which is a fun little like fans of both bands can appreciate that maybe. But
Easter egg, yeah.
yeah, but it's that demo was so bouncy and like so fun, and it still had the BMO sample that's in the noise section now.
Okay.
But yeah, it's like super bouncy, super sparkly. And I really enjoyed that it was one of those songs where it's like, it's dancey, but if you really listen to it, it's pretty sad. And I never thought that song would end up on the record. Because it just wasn't dark enough. I didn't think
Mm-hmm.
it was dark enough. And I didn't know how to change it to make it darker.
Mm-hmm.
And then Emma and I were working on a live stream set, and I was like, fuck, I need like one more song. What should I even play? And she's like, well, if you have anything that's like easy, like let's just try that and we can like rearrange it. And I was like, okay, cool. So I was like, maybe this song, I don't know how I really feel about it. Like it's this weird bubblegum pop thing. And she starts fucking with the chords on our piano. And she's like, this is like dissonant. And I was like, are
Yeah.
you sure those are the right chords? And she's like, these are the chords. This song is dark. And I was like, that is crazy. And, and then we like played it, and I was just like, oh, like that's a song that like sort of was revisited, but like not in
Yeah.
the same way. Like we were just like riffing it to play it for a set, and I was just like, oh God, this song has to just be like this. She's like, yeah, this needs to be a piano ballad. And
Yeah.
I was like, that's very cool. Didn't think I was going to have one of those. And that it was just funny, like, as once you stripped away all of the like pop production and like synths and stuff, I was able to really acknowledge what that song was at its core, which was like a very like rough moment
Yeah.
in time. I wrote that song when I was like homeless, and I was staying with my dad that like night. And I was just going through it. It was wintertime. I was feeling that seasonal depression,
Mm.
and I like never really acknowledged how much of my guts I had kind of spilled out in those lyrics.
Yeah.
And then as I was recording the vocals, like it really was hitting me because it was the last song that I recorded, and it was just like this kind of moment of like acknowledging like the passage of time and like growth and recovery, and it like all kind of hit me at once, which is why the very last vocal of that song, I'm like literally sobbing, and I was
Yeah.
just actually sobbing, and it like happened, and I just like didn't stop the track, and I was just like, I don't know if this is cool. So what I did was first I kept crying, and I took like 3 or 4 more takes of that last vocal.
Oh.
And then I stopped crying and took some normal ones.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sent them to, I don't remember who I sent them to, somebody that I bounced demos off of. And I was just like, is it cool to do this? Because this was like a genuine moment.
To
And
just
they were like, this
sob.
is cool. Yeah. They were like, this is cool. Nobody else is doing this. And I'm like, okay. But it's very real. Yeah. And I think like that's the main thing that shifted in my perspective on any of these songs, was just like really honoring my like past emotions and like the things that I had gone through, and being able to look at them through the lens of like being able to, put out cool music about it now.
Yeah.
Which feels crazy. It's
It's
still
surreal.
very surreal. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think and this is with an outside perspective, with hindsight, I think that is a like, very unique and very special way to end the record, of just the sob take. And that's actually really interesting about the piano part, because the way the song starts is so different from the rest of the album. But now,
Yeah.
like, there's a very deliberate reason why it kind of starts just with the piano ballad. Like, I thought it was gonna be like if you listen to the last Touche Amore record,
Oh yeah.
where the last one's him just like kind of singing over a piano, despite the fact that like they're a post-hardcore band. You're like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing. Okay, this is good. This is cool. But
Yeah.
it just comes out of left field. So I think that, yeah, that's a really fascinating kind of evolution that song, at least just that specific song, took. When you were really like working on these songs, are they always pretty like cathartic? Because I think that's kind of like the word, like very cathartic, very vulnerable, very emotional. I'm kind of drawn more to like the lyrical side of things, because obviously you're right, you can totally shake your ass to this, and
Yeah.
but like I think overall, just kind of like the precedence that the lyrics take is like it's a very cathartic record. Was that always your intent, just even if it was just for your own gratification, your own kind of processing, and really showing like kind of these different points from your life and from your like different emotional snapshots from the last like 5 years or so? Was that always something that was kind of unintentionally happening, or were you really, did that just really start happening this past year as you were kind of settling into like this darker side of like the darker songs that you were working on, like versus like the bubblegum?
It's interesting. Like I when I started doing the pop music, I was really caught up in, one, being like very relatable, and two, I really enjoyed the way that like Purity Ring just kind of like says words, and they like make no sense, but I know the metaphor is like tied to something real.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be that kind of like mysterious sort of thing. Um, but it turned out that I think basically what happened was that I was uh kind of repressing so much that I wasn't able to write anything else.
Mm.
So I like have really tried to take the approach of like writing to cope and writing through my emotions now. and over, you know, the last 12 months or so. Um, and I think that that really started to happen in like an intentional way when I wrote Ragdoll. Like that was like the song that I think that's where it like clicked. Like I said that that's how, kind of how it clicked with like what I wanted to do sonically with the record, but it's also kind of how it clicked in like the lyrical content, where I just like there was a morning where Dustin and I were like driving somewhere and I like mentioned something. I said something about the frigid north because we're, you know, we were in Michigan, and they were like, that's a cool phrase. I was like, that is a cool phrase. So I like wrote it down in my notes app, and then I like dropped them off, and I like came home and I sat down. This was like 8 a.m. I sat down and just like started to kind of fiddle with some, you know, chords or whatever. And like very quickly it like became very clear to me what that song needed to be about and like how I was going to associate that phrase. And that it just like truly just fell out of me. Like, and I'd been trying so hard to write about that for like since it had happened. So that was like a very, very cathartic, but also very like emotionally taxing moment. And so at that moment, I kind of realized I was like, this is one of those songs where if you listen to it, you know what it's about. Like, and I had to kind of have this talk to myself where I was like, are you prepared to do that? Are you prepared to like really just spill your fucking guts to everyone? And I was just like, you know, I think for the people who relate to it, that's important. And I also think it's important for my own growth to do that. And so I kind of made a very conscious decision to be very vulnerable, which is scary. But I realized that people are going to relate more to vulnerability than they are to, you know, me trying to choose pretty words. And not that there's anything wrong with choosing pretty words. Like some of the stuff that I'm writing for the future, I'm finally like getting into that zone. But this record was so much about like a very tumultuous time in my life that I think I really needed to unpack a lot of those feelings. And, you know, putting them into these songs was the best way I could do that. And I'm glad that it shows through. Like, I'm glad that people can kind of hear that there is that kind of catharsis and vulnerability. And yeah, I definitely like, I processed so much of the last like 4 or 5 years through the writing of this album and specifically of the songs that ended up on it. Because even the ones that I wrote before with intentions of making an album, like they just weren't quite, you know, I was holding back, you know, I was holding back because I was afraid to, you know, show what I was feeling.
Put yourself out there in such an exposed way.
Yeah. But the more I thought about it, it was like, I had to think about what I wanted to be known for as an artist. And I think by being very vulnerable, it's clear like what I stand for. In, you know, not just in like being vulnerable, but in like honoring your emotions and like acknowledging like that your trauma is just gonna like, it's kind of always a part of you. And like having these songs now when I listen back, at least it's like, it's kind of like me going back and like, you know, patting little me on the head, being like, hey bud, it's gonna be okay.
It's gonna be okay.
Like, yeah, it like and track 9, Ex Post Facto, that was like the last song that I wrote for the record, and I knew it needed to be this kind of like amalgamation of all of it. You know, I needed it to tie everything together. And there's like a line where I say that it's easier to heal retroactively, and that is purely my like one-liner quip of like what writing this record was. It was like healing wounds that I had just like been ignoring for so long, and now through writing it out, I am able to like actually heal from those.
Yeah, taking like it's very therapeutic, just the whole process, and then now I can't even imagine like seeing it out in the world and actually like
Yeah.
having that step have like that final step having finally been taken. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, wow. Um, I think that's that pretty much sums up. I think yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much going on emotionally and mentally. I think just having listened to this record all day and now like hearing like the stories behind the songs and like in like your process behind it, it's just like I think kind of a bit of a headspin in the best way possible.
Yeah.
So
I hope. I mean, I hope that's a good thing.
yes,
um,
it's a definitely a good thing. Um, hopefully the listener who's the listeners will agree as well. And I'm
yeah.
yeah. Um, this is a bit more of a broad question, kind of. Um, since we've already kind of talked about how like your very stream of consciousness approach to songwriting and how that finally kind of happened this past year. What are some of like the highlights and maybe even like particular struggles of that creative process outside of like Emma and like that piano ballad idea and just kind of some stuff we've already touched on. Like, what are some of your favorite, most like proud moments from this process of like last 2-3 years working on this record? And then what were some of the biggest obstacles outside of like the kind of obvious one we've touched
Yeah.
on a bit before?
I would say that the kind of moments of pride for me are just like the fact that I have learned how to like self-produce in this way um is really cool. I am actually completely floored by the fact that people think it sounds so polished because, like, I have, like, my own perspectives of it, and obviously, like, it going through all of my rounds of mixing until I'm happy and then going to Tyler Floyd for mastering, like, after that process, I'm like, "Okay, this is the best it's gonna sound," and I'm just, like, praying that people enjoy that, but people are like I've gotten a lot of people asking me questions about my production now. Like
Mm-hmm.
my DMs are like full of people asking me like production things, and I am so grateful for that. Like I this doing this record was me learning how to do any of that. Um, and now I'm so excited to be able to use what I've learned now to streamline my process, one, because I feel like I'll be much faster at mixing and, like, doing all this stuff now. Um, but, yeah, I'm just excited that, like, people think this sounds good because I'm like, "Oh, this stuff that I'm, like, learning how to do now is, like, beyond that."
Like, just get
Um
ready, people.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's like, I don't ever wanna be like, yeah, but, like, yeah, I hope you like the record, but, like, what's next is, like, way better."
Yeah.
But that's not true. But definitely, like, that's, like, the high point for me, I think, is, um, learning how to produce and also, like, doing all of it myself, really, just, like,
Yeah.
in general, like, um, even, like, doing the vocal tracking and stuff, I was, like, very proud of, like, how a lot of those takes, like, came out,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of I had this okay, this I'm gonna take a little tangent for a
Okay.
moment, but I had this, like, notebook that kind of just had, like, all of the checklist of all the things I needed to get done for the record. Um, and the track list was, like, totally not what it ended up being on that, but, like, a lot of it was
Yeah.
still there, so I still used it. And there's one note where that it says, "Be kind to yourself, but don't get cocky." And, um, at a certain point, I think when I was recording, probably Take It Back, where those vocals get a little bit crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and very taxing on me. I just scribbled out "Don't get cocky" because I was like, "I'm gonna fucking do this shit. I'm gonna be as
Yeah.
theatrical as I want to." And that's another source of pride for me is kind of like accepting like the way that I wanna deliver these vocals. 'Cause and also just like hearing the growth of, like, my singing in general, like, because this is the most I've heard myself sing and in like a way where I'm like really going for it. Cause
Yeah.
like obviously I have plenty of demos where I'm like singing, but like I'm not really like singing, you know? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, being able to accept like the moments where you let like an emotion overtake you and the vocal gets a little ugly, like being able to relinquish the fear of people thinking that that sounds bad, was like really big for me because I've always loved when people do that. Like obviously I love rap music, and I love when people's voices get a little fucked up
Yeah.
sounding. Like I think that there's something very special there. And it's one of those things that I was afraid to do at first because I'm making pop music.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, it needs to sound polished, it needs to sound smooth. Um, and being able to kind of relinquish that and put my own personality into it, which is my personality of having played like punk music for so long,
Yeah.
um, like felt really, really good. And it's one of those things that like I hope it sets me apart, and I like think that it does. Like it, as far as the genre is concerned, um, yeah, those are definitely the high points. The struggles,
Mm-hmm.
uh, other than the like literally spilling everything that I've ever felt in my life, um, was just like keeping the motivation,
Mm.
um, because I really did not think anyone was going to give a single fuck about this record. Especially as I was putting out um
The
the
singles.
singles, like they got like fine reception. Like when Ragdoll came out, people were like, "This is really cool," but then I never really like previously my uh Spotify stats. We'll get into the numbers for a second.
Okay.
Previously, my Spotify stats, like I was never getting more than like 10 plays a day at max. And typically it was more like 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know that's because I didn't have that much material out, so I tried not to, like, get caught up in that. But it was just one of those things where I was like, "I'm putting all this time into it. Is this really even worth it for me to, like,
Mm-hmm.
spend this time and, like, spend the money for mastering and, like, everything like that?" And to put myself through the emotional ringer,
Yeah.
of, like, doing it at all. Um but then I, like, announced the record, and people seemed stoked. People really liked "Over It," which I knew they would, because that's the one song on the record that's just like, this is just relatable, and it's a
Yeah.
little bit, like, sassy, and it's just like, "Fuck a fake friend." Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's what that whole song is about. So I, like, knew people were gonna like that, and I knew they would like Jesse being on it and it being this kind of, like, lo-fi kinda SoundCloud
Yeah.
sort of song. But when people responded so positively to that song, I was like, "Oh my god, they're gonna hate the rest of the record. None of it sounds like this." Um, but it's yeah, so trying to push myself through that fear that no one was gonna care, um, was really hard. And at a certain point, I just came to the realization that, like, "Hey, you did this for you,
Yeah.
and the fact that you did it at all is crazy." Um,
Seriously. That's such an important
so
part of like
yeah.
putting anything out like this, like anything creative into the world. It's like the fact that you did it and like made it through to the end is like an accomplishment in and of
Yeah,
itself.
and I had to just keep telling myself that, but then the record came out and holy fuck, people really liked it. People really like it. It's crazy. Like,
Yeah.
I got, like I mean, it hasn't even been out for a week, and I have, like we're coming up on, like, 6,000, like, total plays for the record, like, today.
Wow.
Um, which is absolutely insane to me. Um, I really just did not like, it fully surpassed my expectations. Like, I knew I'd probably be surprised just because, like, people were gonna say nice things, and I was ready for people to say nice things and for that to feel good, but, like, I was so not prepared for, like, how positive, like, it has been received. Um, and I know, like, now we're getting into the point where there's gonna be, like, reviews and stuff, and I'm just like, I hope that, I hope that those are good, but also, like, at the end of the day, I think it's a good record. I think it's a pretty damn good
And
record,
like what
and
one person thinks and puts into words and like that should have no bearing. I think that's just true
Yeah.
across the board. Like if like Pitchfork puts out a review and it's just like a memeable GIF or something, like who gives a shit?
Yeah.
Like you're not. I mean, you're not gonna get like the monkey peeing in its own mouth treatment. Obviously, they're past that. I think, and also,
Right.
I don't. No one will give this record that kind of review. But
Also, if Pitchfork hated my record, I would be so flattered that they even listened to it.
Oh, no, my band's putting out a record this year, and we're like, if we can just get a 5, like, we can quit. Like, we'll just give up music. Like, it's kind of mediocre, and you're like, yes.
I really my like goal in life is for Anthony Fantano to say that he hates my music. That would like make me feel so good.
Seriously, like,
because I'm just tired of like I mean, people respect his opinion. That's like fine. I don't care. Like, I don't look to music reviewers for my opinions. So like, people who do, that's like cool that you do your thing. But I just like, it would just bring me so much joy for him to hate it, and then me to be able to be like, yeah, he hates this. That's sick. Like,
like that's like a clout achievement that like I think is unparalleled to like. That's even higher than like getting like a positive review. I think if he like gives you like a terrible review, like you're gonna be way more infamous.
I would never stop tweeting about that. I would never stop tweeting about it.
With good reason. Like you'll be releasing like LP4, and you're like, hey, he still hated that first one. Maybe he'll hate this one too. It's the defining.
Keeps on giving.
it's the defining Get Tuff moment. Is just Fantano panning you. Okay. Tangent recovered.
Yes.
So just given how, I mean, obviously you did like all the writing, recording, pretty much like 99.9% of everything yourself, and also just given how important it is to you and just like how vulnerable the record is, did you always want to have like friends and collaborators on the record, or was that just kind of like a natural process of like just being connected with so many different musicians, and you're thinking like, oh, what if these people were on this song, or like what if this person did a feature on this song, like with Jesse and Sleepyhead, or was that something that just kind of your mind opened up to the idea of having people I can't think of the word, just contribute to the songs, instead of just having it be like, this is like, these are my songs. Not that I think you were being like a dragon hoarding, like no one touched my songs, but like just how important they were. I think for you is, I think, not antithetical to having collaborators, but it's like, oh, I wonder, like, how did these collaborations come about? How did you kind of think about, or were they just things that surprised you, honestly?
So the thing for me is that in a perfect world, I would have people collaborating on every single song.
Like Gorillaz.
Because I just think that no matter what music you're making, you're always going to end up with a better product if you have additional perspective. And I understand people getting kind of like protective of their artistic vision. But that's not me. Like literally the best example of this is that whenever Emma and I play, or like specifically when we were just about to do the album release stream and we had Emma and Nick playing with me, they both would ask me kind of like, what if we change this part to this, and what if I played this differently than what's on the recording? And literally every time I'm like, I asked you to play because I like what you do. Literally do whatever you want, and if I have an issue with any of it, I will tell you. But I would never want to hinder somebody's kind of interpretation of like the music. So I have always just like, I would love this to be like a whole band of people, or a rotating cast of people who get to like change and rearrange the songs, because like at the end of the day, I really enjoy being the voice of this project and like being like the main writer, but like I love collaborating with people. The stuff that I'm doing next is actually a ton of like features from friends and just like collaborating on music together, and I may be even doing like a whole like collabed EP with someone, like I just really love making music with people. I think it's so much fun, and I think you can just, I don't know, you always end up with something way more special when you bring in other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so grateful that I have, like, all of these amazing musicians surrounding me, where I can kind of just be like, "Hey, you wanna do a song together?" And people are like, "Yeah." Like, everybody's got their, like, gear, and, we're doing, like, distant collaborations. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's so much fun. Um, and yeah, I mean, in a in an ideal world, I also would love, like, even outside of the creative process of, like, writing and stuff, I would love to, like, do the next LP maybe, like, in a studio with a producer,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Get Chris
just because
Teddy on it.
well, that's the thing, is that I love Chris Teddy, and Chris Teddy is my BFF, and I think Chris would make my record very cool, if we worked together on it. Um, but also I feel like Chris and I would never get anything done because we'd just be dicking around. But I just, like, it would be such a dream, actually. Like, you say
Yeah.
that kind of jokingly, but, like, that is
Well, yeah.
genuinely something I thought about.
Like, you're already in the
Like,
studio with him for weekdays, so like just like, hey, can we
yeah,
stay like an extra couple hours? Maybe work on some new
right.
songs.
Yeah. Like, and I would be so interested in, like, the way that he would interpret that as a person who works mostly with, like, analog instruments, and maybe making something that doesn't rely so much on the electronics
Mm-hmm.
would be really cool. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm so open to, like, this project being a million different things. Like,
Yeah.
I don't wanna be pigeonholed into one, like, sound or one vibe, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Just kind of
yeah,
record by
I don't know.
record. Yeah. Like taking
Yeah,
each
I love
fascination as
when
it
people
comes.
change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think that's, important, and, the best way to grow and change is to pick your friends' brains, about how they, like, see music,
Mm-hmm.
because everybody sees it differently. Like, you never, even if you're, like, mostly on the same page with somebody about writing, like, there's always gonna be those little things where you, like, kind of divulge, and,
Mm-hmm.
like, you go a different route. As Same with, like, production and stuff. Like, I don't know, I'm so grateful to be surrounded by so many people who have been able to, like, help me in this process. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, this would not sound nearly as good as it does without, like, not just the people who are on the record who contributed, but the people that I like. Specifically, Jimmy from the Sonderbombs is
Mm-hmm.
the main one. I just gotta shout him out always with this record, because literally Jimmy has heard every demo I've done for, like, the last 2 years. And, like, given me, like, very real, like, critique, and, like, really helped me, like, bounce ideas about, like, production, and, all of that. And I have, like, plenty of friends in my life who have helped with that, but I, like, genuinely, this record would be nowhere near as cool as it is if people didn't give me that, like, honest feedback
Yeah.
about how they, like, perceive it.
Mm-hmm. So, this is kind of just follow up on that. With your just kind of constant desire to try new things, work with new people, just expand your sound and not be pigeonholed, do you still want there to be like a kind of definitive, like, Get Tuff, like, thing where, like, even if it's like a song that sounds completely different from anything on In Sickness and in Hell, do you still want people to be able to, like, listen to a song from like LP3 or something, and just, like, without looking at, like, the artist name on, like, the vinyl, or what, on whatever they're using to listen to it, like, do you still want there to be, like, someone will hear it and they're like, yep, this has Get Tuff energy, or, like, to put it very simply, but, like, it just kind of,
Yeah.
there's a through line beyond just, like, the obvious fact of you're the one making the music.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think at its core, I will always be doing very, like, the drama pop thing that I'm kind of branding under. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think at its core, it will always be that,
Okay.
that kind of, tethers me to a sound. And at least the way that I perceive that is, um, through, like, theatrical delivery of the vocals,
Mm-hmm.
um, and, like, cheeky nature of the lyrics.
Yeah.
I think those are, like, the two calling cards of this project that I don't think I'll ever really let go of. Um, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, I would hope that like my voice is like I don't know if my voice is unique. It's hard to know what you sound like, but I think like my voice and my delivery will be the thing that kind of like keeps it
kind of anchors it.
Yeah, that anchors it, hopefully. And, you know, my love of like really just like hearty sub bass at the bottom of something that's ultimately sparkly, you know?
It balances out. You gotta have some high and gotta have the low end.
Yeah.
It all comes together.
Mhm.
Um, what's your proudest moment on the whole record now that you've had time to listen to it a million times, and now that it's also been out for about a half week? Like,
Oh my
what
god.
moment that every time you hear it, just kind of like your eyes light up, and you just really feel like that extra rush? You're like, wow, I did this. Not like disparaging the rest of the record, because obviously, like, it's good to be proud of like all of it, the whole labor of love. But like, what moment really
Yeah.
gets you?
Uh, it's gotta be in the last track. Like, just the vocals in general on that song are pretty wild, but specifically, like, oh my god, there's that I, like, hit this note. There's, like, a kind of glissando note on cry, on the word cry, that is just, like, it's so like, there's the glissando there on it, and I think that moment, I was just like especially, like, even when I was tracking it, I was like, "Whoa, damn, dude, what you doing?" Um, that, like and just that song as a whole, I think, like, I really had to, like, harness a lot of energy to, like, be able to, like, do those vocals,
Hmm.
and I'm very, very proud of the way that it turned out.
Yeah. Um, okay. This is kind of a cheeky question, but how did you feel about the whole front bottoms thing with accidentally titling your record almost the same as
Ugh.
theirs?
Oh my
Um,
god,
and
okay.
like the fact that you weren't even aware, I think is the best part about it. Like you just didn't even know until your record,
Yeah.
like their record was out. You're like, wait, what's happened here?
Well, I've had this record title for so long, for, like, probably 3 years at
They,
this point.
well, they rip you off
Um,
then.
yeah, well, I didn't, like, announce it,
I know.
obviously, but still, yeah, like, I've had this title for so long, um, and, like, it's just crazy. I had no idea they'd even put out a record, and the funniest part of all
Yeah.
of this too is, like so I was in, the studio for Safe Face, in December, and little did I know so me and Tyler were talking about that whole thing and how it was
Hmm.
just really funny, and then, Brett Romness, who we're recording with, turns around and goes, "I recorded that record," and I was just like, "I had
Oh,
no idea they even made it," and he's like, "Yeah, yeah, I made that." I was like, "That's really hilarious," and I, like, kind of explained the thing, and he goes, "Your name's better." I was just like, "Yeah, that's, like, kind of, the
that's like a
way
cherry
that it
on
goes."
top
Yeah,
of
I was
all
just
of
like,
it.
"This" but it's also just, like it's funny to me that their record has that name because, like and this is undisputable. My album name is the better version of that name. It's indisputable because
Yeah.
it rhymes with the source material. Like,
Yeah, theirs is
and
just kind of very like, oh, I don't know. I'm letting
yeah.
the fact that I'm not a front bottoms fan get ahead of me here.
Oh, no,
Um,
that's fine. Oh, it's just funny to me that, it's so close. Like, they so easily could have just had my name because
yeah,
it's, like, so, so close. And what I'm realizing, the thing that is really funny is that people seem to think, specifically younger people, I think I tweeted about this the other day. It specifically younger people seem to think that the front bottoms invented the phrase "in sickness and in blank" because they're like, a bunch of people have commented on posts that I've made where they're like, "Didn't the front bottoms just put out this record?" And I'm just like, it's a play on the wedding vow in sickness and in
yeah,
health, and that's what theirs is probably pulling from also.
yeah.
But this is not an original thing. We're both ripping something else off. But these young kids, I realized
Uh,
they've probably never been to a wedding.
I guess. Yeah.
Like,
Like,
so I
how do
don't
you
know.
still? How do you not know that phrase though? Like, I'm guessing like they've seen like movies or like something.
I don't know.
I don't know. That's kind of reminds me of like.
Kids don't watch movies, they just watch TikToks now.
I mean, like, same, but so I can't really judge them on that.
Me too.
But like that reminds me of when like 5 years ago or something, like Rihanna, Kanye West, and Paul McCartney did a song together.
Oh yeah.
And I'm pretty sure there was enough like people that were genuinely like, I don't know who Paul McCartney is. Who is this up and comer? He's gonna blow up. And then there were people like memeing on that where they're like, obviously he's Paul McCartney.
Oh my god,
that's
so
like people
funny.
who just don't know what wedding vows are. They're like, didn't the front bottoms invent that? It's like, no, they didn't.
Yeah, it's so silly, but it's those comments have been very minimal, thankfully.
Good.
And in my head, I say that that's because my name is the better version of it.
They're just lashing out because they're jealous. Like, oh,
yeah,
my faves didn't pick the better name.
It was right in front of them. How did they not pick that name? That's the thing that's surprising to me.
Yeah. I guess they really wanted fire imagery in their album title. I don't know. I'm not Brian Sella. I've never met the dude. Probably not going to. That sounded shady. That wasn't meant to be shady. Who knows?
Yeah.
Cool. So this bit will be a little bit familiar from the Weekdays interview, but what have you been listening to lately? Like, who has been in your rotation? Who do you want to shout out? Whether it's just like you've really enjoyed the latest Taylor Swift and you just want to mention that, or like what friends have put out music or are working on music that you just kind of want to give them a shout out, like just spreading love.
Well, yes, obviously I like the new Taylor Swift.
That was a loaded question.
Yeah, I don't even need to get into that because I'm not like a stan, but like I'm a stan. Like I'm not like in the stan culture, but like
you won't threaten to kill a journalist, but like you love her music.
But like I love her music so much.
Good. That's healthy. I think that's okay.
Yeah. But so yeah, I have been listening to Evermore quite a lot. But I've also been listening to Acid Goth, which is Anderson Reagan from Pictures of Vernon and Magic Ray Gun. It's kind of hard to even call it anything. It's kind of like a indie pop, SoundCloud, lo-fi sort of thing. It's really, really great. Record called Rapid Exponential Growth Machine. I think that's right. I've listened to that a ton this week. I've been listening to Eichlers, who I love. Nice little bit of ska trap, ska emo trap. Which it's really funny. Like I didn't even know who Russ Ike, who does that project. I didn't even know him until I was looking for somebody to do a feature on my Cobra Starship set. And I like tweeted about it. And then Sammy from Just Friends hit me up and was just like, hey, our friend Russ does this project and like his flow is pretty good. Like maybe you should hit him up if you want. I was like, oh, cool. I like checked out his stuff. I was like, this is cool. Russ and I became friends. He did the feature. And then like he put his record out and I was just like, oh my God, this is like fucking awesome. And it's funny because like I was actually telling him earlier that kind of his record is like the reason that I'm like into ska again, which is hilarious to say because I'm close with Jeremy from Ska 2 Network and like I've done songs with them. And I also live with members of Grey Matter. So I'm like surrounded by ska. And I love both of those projects a lot, but Eichlers was the first one like external to my like immediate friend group that I like got really into and has like inspired me to actually listen to more new ska. Yeah, so what else have I been listening to? Gosh, I've been listening to a ton of Dolly Parton, but that's just because I'm kind of going through it.
Was it like her birthday recently or something?
Her birthday's today.
It's today. Oh, it's her and David Lynch, I think.
Yeah.
Much better reasons to celebrate.
I've listened to a lot of Dolly. I've been listening to a ton of Blondie lately, which was kind of inspired by also listening to the new Miley Cyrus record.
That tracks,
where she covers Heart of Glass. But yeah, I only listened to the Miley record a couple times. I really like it. But immediately I was just like, I just want to go listen to Blondie now though. So I listened to a lot of Blondie.
That's almost like the worst thing that can happen with a record where you're like, oh, this is nice, but I want to listen to what inspired it instead.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just like, I don't know. It's kind of funny.
It's like a double-edged sword, I guess.
Yeah. It's funny when you ask like friends who put out music, because like what I've been listening to lately has been like stuff very external to like the scene.
Yeah.
I think mostly because I was like preparing for a release, and I was just like, if I listen to bands in the scene, I'm gonna like fixate on that.
Yeah.
But I've also been listening to Born Without Bones. I'm always listening to Born Without Bones, though. They're like my favorite band. And new Ariana Grande, which I also love. She's my problematic fave.
Yeah. Why is she problematic? Like just kind of like the appropriation stuff, kind of.
Yeah, it's the appropriation. The like kind of blackface thing that she does. But you know, you can't. I don't idolize anybody. So that's like a positive.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I feel like I had some other friends that I was listening to. I was listening to everybody who did my live stream. So like Jiraiya, Childlike Empress, Jer, Foxy Dads, Heck Dang, Pancho Villa Skull. I made like a little playlist of all of like my favorite tunes from them, and I was like just spinning that like pretty constantly as I like got prepared for it. And Phony. Phony's the other band that I've been listening to in the scene.
Yeah, they put out that record last year, right?
Yeah, Knock Yourself Out. I got like I listened to it when it came out, and I liked it, and then I kind of like forgot about it. Like I feel like a lot of stuff came out that like completely missed me, and then I got really back into that record over the last like 2 weeks, and it's really, really great. Yeah. Also anticipating For Your Health record.
Have you heard it?
Coming out very soon. I'm so excited. I haven't heard it. I want to.
No further comment.
I would like to. I just don't. I don't know. I don't know if me and Hayden like got it like that I could be like, leak me your record.
Just go through Alex Martin.
I would hope so.
Like, hey Alex, leak me Hayden's record.
I didn't even think about that. Alex and I are emailing like constantly too. So.
Oh, that's all I'm gonna say.
Alex, leak me everything that you've heard lately.
Yeah, please send me all the SoundCloud playlists.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very excited for that record as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so check out everything that RB just mentioned. Thank you so much for taking like an hour and 40 or an hour and 15 minutes to chat. This was awesome. Congrats on the record.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The Ear Coffee Podcast is a companion to the blog of the same name. If you like this episode, please leave us a rate and review so we can stand out among the other music podcasts. You can follow us at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram @EarCoffee. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.